Morning. The only requirement for this, John told me, was I had to keep it under 45 minutes. So I'll do my best. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is remove my gloves, if I may, because I can't turn pages with them. As Chaplain John said, I am Joel Carlton. I've been a firefighter here in town for, well, since 2011 I joined. So he gave a little bit of that backstory. First and foremost, it's a high honor, an extremely humbling honor to be here, to honor our fallen, honor those that are buried here, and their sacrifices for our freedom. And that's primarily why we're here. And it's a great and high honor as a member of public service to do that with all of you here, all of you veterans and those in the military. We appreciate it very much. The Crosslake Fire Department does as well. Also, I want to thank personally Legion Post 500, my family here, for all you've done to support my family too in times of need. There have been times of need and going through trials, and you guys stepped up in a way that was absolutely amazing, and I'm indebted to you. I'll never forget it. Thank you very much. I wanted to start here a little bit. We'll give a little bit of overview of what I do in fire, and these gentlemen do too. But the main focus here is on Memorial Day. So I'm going to just give a couple brief things here, give a little bit more understanding to you for what we're doing and what my life is like as a firefighter here in Crosslake. And then we'll move on to another discussion in which my intention is to provoke some deeper thoughts on Memorial Day and really answering the question why we do what we do. Because that's the most important question we need to answer, because that gives us the foundation for why we're here today and why it really matters. And then after that, what I want to do, I want to move into kind of my telling my story. Like John was saying, my grandfather is a fighter pilot. We're going to go back in history a little bit. We're going to go back to just before the Revolution. And we're going to talk about some examples of the providence of God throughout this nation and its founding, and certain events. They're too numerous to name, but I'm going to name a few that led up to me being here before you today to bring this word to you. Let's get going. We're a full-service fire department, so we do emergency medicine, as well as we work road for traffic and vehicle accidents. When you call, we haul. If it's fire, if it's medical, we're there for you. And our commitment remains day after day. We have all of us here, most of us are all certified in emergency medicine, so we work that too. So all the medical calls, the fire calls, vehicle accidents, public assists, all of those things. I mean, we'll even get, we've even been called out to get people stuck off the ice. That's what we do. Every night, we have at least two responders on call on a duty crew shift that are there to serve you. And when you call, we guarantee at least two responders on a call. We're only human. There are mistakes that are made, but that's our goal. Our goal is to serve the public in that regard. I want to thank all of you also out here today for all your generous support in the community. This community in Crosslake is a really special community in that they rally every year to help us raise financial support and what we need for our Relief Association and for our training, for our equipment. So that is so deeply appreciated, and we appreciate all you here. You're our community and our family, and we're here to serve you. Something else I wanted to talk about just real quick and kind of a lighter side of things. 911 calls. What happens? There's a lot of interesting trepidation I find with a lot of people when it comes to calling 911. A lot of us has never done it before, and it makes us nervous. It's one of those interesting things. And so I was just going to tell real quick what happens on the other end of that call when you do that. First of all, it is a service that you provide. It's a service you pay for. You can call that number when you need help anytime. What you're going to get is you're going to get a dispatcher in this area from the Crow Wing County Dispatch Office. They're very kind. They're very cordial. They're going to help calm you down, carry you through whatever your need is, and then they will dispatch the appropriate resources to that. And so that's how we get our calls. You call 911, the dispatcher calls us. They give us the information we need. They'll give us your address, the details of that call, and then we come running. So that's how that works. Don't be afraid to use that service. It's one of those things. They're always there to help. We're always there to help. If you find yourself in need, we want you to call. So don't be embarrassed about it. Don't be afraid of it. It's a great service. All right, let's go back in time a little bit here. We'll move right along. We're going to start in May 1755. Before the founding of our nation, the French and Indian War was in full swing. 2 regiments of British regulars under command of General Edward Braddock had arrived from England and were marching through Pennsylvania toward Fort Duquesne in an attempt to expel the French forces who were encamped in the Ohio Valley Territory. Among his staff was a 23-year-old officer in command of 100 Virginia buckskins named George Washington. Before reaching the fort, Braddock unwittingly led his force into the awaiting ambush of French and Indian troops that fired on the 4-mile-long column of British soldiers from hidden positions among the trees and the rocks. Though Braddock's force greatly outnumbered their opposition, the French and Indian force was tactically superior in their execution of guerrilla warfare. It was something the British had not encountered. During the invariable slaughter that ensued, of the 1,500 British regulars, 714 were killed, 37 wounded. Of the 86 officers, 26 were killed and 37 wounded. Of the mounted officers, only 1 was left unscathed. That was George Washington. After having 2 horses shot out from under him, the young Washington rallied the survivors and led a retreat to Fort Cumberland, and after setting in for the night, discovered he had 4 bullet holes through his coat, fragments in his hair, and yet remained untouched. In a letter home to his family, he wrote, and I quote, "But by the all-powerful dispensations of Providence, I've been protected beyond all human probability or expectation. For I had 4 bullets through my coat and 2 horses shot out from under me, yet escaped unhurt, although death was leveling my companions on every side of me." Soon after, of course, came the American Revolution and the founding of this great nation. As once said, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Yet freedom that came at such a great cost, had to continually be defended. And soon after, another conflict was to darken the shores of this new nation. This new war called for the service of a young boy from Orono, Maine. In September of 1799, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, George Washington Carlton, was born, 3 months before President Washington was laid to rest. He would answer the call to defend life and liberty at the age of 12 and served as a drummer boy in the War of 1812. By divine providence, he would survive that conflict, later marry his wife Susanna and raise 8 children, one of which being my 3rd great-grandfather, James A. Carlton. The youngest of 8, went on to serve his country in the Civil War conflict. Perhaps he observed the first Memorial Day recognized on May 30th of 1868, and since then, we've been meeting on this day to do the same thing. To James and his wife Mary was born my great-great-grandfather Charles Wesley Carlton, who served his community in Iowa as a firefighter on the Sawyer Hose Company No. 2. Finally got a firefighter. To Charles and his wife, Anna, was born my great-grandfather, Cecil Carlton, who worked as a surveyor in the Forest Service. And then to Cecil and Florence was born one of my greatest heroes, both in war and in peace, my grandfather, Delno Wayne Carlton. Shortly after the onset of World War II, we have something here. Shortly after the onset of World War II, Grandpa, along with his brother, enlisted in the Navy and later transferred to the Marine Corps as a commissioned officer and fighter pilot. He deployed to the South Pacific Theater of Operations as one of the first two squadrons of fighter aircraft to specialize in nighttime combat operations. While both carrier and land-based, Grandpa joined the island hopping campaign on the push to mainland China. During this tour of duty, he stacked up multiple air-to-air victories and would be awarded multiple unit citations as well as the Air Medal and Distinguished Flying Cross, both 3 times. When the Marine Corps landed on Okinawa, they pushed in, and one of the main objectives was to take Yantan Airfield, to use as a base of operations from there to move to closer to the mainland China, or mainland Japan, sorry. The Marines took it in just a little over 2 days, immediately set up shop. The Navy brought ashore fuel, and my grandpa's squadron was one of a few that initially started operations off of Yantan Airfield. They really didn't have much. The CB, thanks to the CBs, they knocked out an airfield and got everything up in operation, but they really had not much for security. Besides the Marine forces on the ground that were pushing the enemy back into the jungle, they didn't have much protection as of yet as far as air raids were concerned. And so most nights they had to deal with the Japanese Imperial Air Force bombing that airfield, at least until they could gain full air superiority a little later. So they had issues every night, almost every night, with strafing runs. They had kamikaze attacks that brought bomber loads of commandos that would literally land in the airfield and set explosive charges on their planes. And so my grandfather and some of his squadron mates felt it prudent to dig a bunker. Why not, right? I've got pictures of them digging that hole and covering it with logs. And because up to that point, with no barracks, all they stayed in was a little 2-man pup tent. There was nothing much there, but it was home. One night, my grandfather, they were awakened to the sound of yet another air raid. The sound of the whistling bombs, he said he never forgot, but you could hear them coming. They scrambled out of their tent, and he said, I remember it clearly because he said, I dove headlong down into the bunker just like a dive off the dock into the lake, back home in Emily. After the raid, they emerged from their hole to find the tent he had been sleeping in was riddled with shrapnel. He went in to collect his things and found a piece of that bomb, of one of the bomb fragments, had torn a slot up his mattress right where his back would have been. He'd been laid, spared by divine providence. Just like in one way, the way George Washington coat full of bullet holes still on display at the Smithsonian Museum can be seen by divine providence. Grandpa was spared that situation and that death. And today I hold that piece of shrapnel that he dug out of his mattress. I still have it today. He carried it with him as a reminder. So once again, by divine providence, Grandpa Dell made it home. After countless brushes with death during nearly a year-long deployment and 91 combat missions. He and my grandmother Ruth raised 4 children, of which my father, John R. Carlton, who is with us here today, would go on to raise and educate me and my 8 siblings and build the foundation for who I have become today. Just your average dragon slayer with 8 kids who likes to run to the flames. And I must say, too, on my wife's side, her family, very similar story. Her grandfather landing in Normandy, Omaha Beach, to her father's service in the great conflict of Vietnam. and the Lord sparing both of them to bring my wife into the world, and we were to meet years later at a Subway restaurant in Billings, Montana, by Providence. And now I'm before you today with 8 children and an amazing wife. And then, in October of 2019, my grandfather passed from this life. His body was laid to rest. And my Post 500 family answered the call once again to give him full honors and salute the old Marine one final time. And I thank you again for that. So from George Washington all the way down to firefighter like me, why do we do what we do? Why did they do what they did? Well, Darwin's theory of naturalistic evolution, popularized mostly in the last 100 years or so, proposes that our life here on Earth is nothing really more than a game of survival of the fittest, in which the weakest among us are effectively purged by the strongest in order to progress to a higher state of humanity. Interestingly enough, however, our rich tradition in the armed services and emergency services flies directly in the face of that concept, in that we, the strongest, put our lives at risk for the preservation and protection of the vulnerable among us. It's exactly the opposite of the concept that we are taught today. Why is that? Answering that why question, I believe, will inherently make us better at performing our duty, because it provides us an ultimate purpose for the reality, or for the duty that is above ourselves. It provides us a framework to reconcile with death, destruction, pain, critical stress, mental illness, and trauma that we will inevitably encounter throughout our careers. And we remember today those that struggle with this and the scourge of mental illness and suicide that has plagued emergency services and the military. I believe this answer is an answer to that problem. I believe that the reasons for our traditional ethics in this country, both in our national defense, law enforcement, and emergency services, as well as the answer to the question why we do what we do, lies in a transcendent or overarching moral law that has been prevalent in the worldview foundational to American culture that says we risk our own lives to save others because of these principles. One, the sanctity of life. Life is worth saving. In the Word of God in Genesis 1:27, it reads, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them." If we are made in God's image, then there is an inherent value to human life that goes beyond just our personal survival. The examples throughout history that reinforce this principle of people laying down their lives for the preservation of others is endless. The most significant, of course, being Christ willingly laying down his own life upon the cross to pay the debt for our sin that we could not pay. Number 2, our love for neighbor. Essentially the golden rule, we've all heard it. Treat others the way that we would like them to treat you, with love, compassion, and respect, defending innocence. Number 3, the right to private property. It's worth protecting. This is what we do in fire. This is a big part of what we do. In essence, we are talking about protecting freedom. The right to private property is absolutely essential to maintaining a free society. Freedom to own and to steward your land and to have a home. Freedom to a virtuous self-government, and freedom to provide an inheritance for future generations. These benefits can be wiped out in a moment's notice in disasters like war, fires, floods, medical emergencies, or violence that those in the military and us in emergency services and law enforcement risk our lives to protect. So in closing, my friends, today, if freedom is worth dying for, if truth is worth defending, if innocence is worth protecting, if property is worth preserving, if life is worth saving, then there necessarily has to be a lawgiver. A transcendent authority that says this is right or this is wrong. This is good, this is evil, and this is why. Psalm 33 says, "The word of the Lord is upright, and all his work is done in faithfulness. He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the steadfast love of the Lord. The counsel of the Lord stands forever. The plans of his heart to all generations. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he has chosen for his heritage. The king is not saved by his great army. A warrior is not delivered by his great strength. The war horse is a false hope for salvation, and by its great might it cannot rescue. Let your steadfast love, O Lord, be upon us, even as we hope in you." My friends, if we establish these fundamental truths, then and only then can we fully reconcile the great sacrifices of those buried here on this hallowed ground. We honor their lives and sacrifices today by honoring the giver of all life first. This is why we do what we do. Thank you. And may God bless this nation and show us his mercy again.